The United Nations Deep Space Monitoring Array sat quietly on the edge of the moon's far side. A ring of silver dishes turned toward the endless dark. It had been built to listen, not to speak, to catch whispers from distant stars, not shouts from dying worlds. For years it heard nothing but cosmic static and the occasional echo of human-made probes drifting beyond the solar system. Then one Tuesday morning it heard something else, a signal, faint, broken, repeating. Maya Ellis was the first to notice it. She had been reviewing routine data logs when a strange pattern caught her eye. Irregular pulses buried under layers of background noise. At first, she thought it was interference from a solar flare, but the pattern held. It repeated every 17 minutes like a heartbeat refusing to stop. She called Luke Garrett, her old friend from the UN Security Council's Xenolinguistics Task Force, even though he wasn't officially on duty. Luke arrived at the lunar station 12 hours later, his face tired but alert. He'd been sleeping in his office again, wrapped in the same worn jacket he'd worn during the Mars border crisis 5 years back. Maya didn't ask. She just handed him a data pad with the raw signal. He listened. Then he listened again. "That's not machine code," he said quietly. "That's language." Over the next 3 weeks, a small team worked in secret. They filtered the noise, aligned the pulses, and ran the fragments through every translation algorithm Earth had. Slowly, painfully, meaning emerged. The signal came from Kepler 186f, a planet once considered a candidate for alien life. Now it carried a message of terror. "They are burning our cities," the decoded words read. "They take our children. They erase our names. If anyone hears this, please do not let them forget us." The senders called themselves the Virelli. They described a war not of territory but of erasure. Their enemy, the Korath Dominion, did not conquer. They consumed. They stripped planets of culture, memory, and life, leaving only silence behind. The Virelli were the latest target, and they were almost gone. When the full translation was ready, Maya and Luke presented it to the Global Council in Geneva. The room was cold, quiet, filled with diplomats in sharp suits and generals with folded hands. They watched the playback of the Virelli message, grainy images of burning towers, crowds running through smoke, a child's hand reaching from rubble before the feed cut out. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the debate began. Some argued for immediate action. "This is genocide," said a delegate from Nairobi. "We have a moral duty." Others warned of overreach. "We barely have warp capability," countered a representative from Beijing. "We're not ready for interstellar war." The European bloc pushed for sanctions and diplomatic pressure, though no one knew if the Korath even accepted envoys. The American delegation stayed neutral, citing strategic ambiguity. Luke stood at the back of the chamber, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had seen what happened when the world waited too long. He remembered Syria, remembered Rohingya, remembered how civilized nations always found reasons not to act until it was too late. Now, light years away, history was repeating itself. Maya sat beside him, her fingers tapping nervously on her tablet. She wasn't a soldier. She was a scientist. But she had spent her life studying the stars, dreaming of contact, of shared knowledge. This wasn't the first contact she'd imagined, but it was real. And if humanity looked away now, what did that say about them? The vote came 3 days later. 78 nations in favor of monitoring the situation. 62 in favor of sending a humanitarian probe. 0 in favor of military or rescue intervention. The official statement read, "Earth remains committed to peace and non-interference in extraterrestrial conflicts." Luke read the statement on his screen and threw his coffee cup against the wall. It shattered brown liquid streaking the white tiles. Maya didn't flinch. She just looked at him and said, "Then we do it ourselves." They didn't speak of treason. They didn't talk about exile or court-martials. They talked about ships, about fuel, about who still owed them favors. Luke reached out to old comrades, pilots, engineers, medics, who had left service disillusioned but hadn't lost their fire. Maya contacted researchers who had been sidelined for pushing too hard on warp field stability. They met in basements, in abandoned warehouses, in encrypted chat rooms that vanished after 10 seconds. One of the first to join was Jake Morales, a freighter pilot who'd flown supply runs to the Jupiter colonies before quitting over safety violations. He knew every bolt on a deep-range hauler and didn't care much for rules. Then came Riley Thompson, a wiry engineer who'd once jury-rigged a fusion core from scrap during the Titan ice riots. Last was Nina Cruz, a field medic who'd served on the Venus terraforming project until budget cuts shut it down. She carried a trauma kit that looked like it could rebuild a heart with duct tape and hope. They gathered near the Mars orbital dockyard in a section marked for decommission. 3 old freighters sat there, Wayfarer, Haven, and Longstride, scheduled to be melted down for parts. But their hulls were solid, their frames sound. With the right modifications, they could jump. Riley got to work immediately, stripping military-grade shielding from retired defense satellites and welding it onto the freighter's undersides. Jake rewired the navigation systems to handle short-range warp bursts, something no civilian ship was ever meant to do. Nina converted cargo bays into medical bays, installing cryopods salvaged from a failed cryonic startup. Maya worked on the jump drives, integrating her own experimental phase coil design that had been rejected by the Space Council for being too unstable. Luke handled logistics and security. He used old contacts to reroute power, fake maintenance logs, and bribe dock inspectors with rare earth metals. Every night, under the red glow of Mars's sky, they worked in silence, their breath fogging in the thin air of the pressurized hangar. Back on Earth, news of the Varelli genocide faded from headlines, replaced by elections, scandals, sports. Life went on. But in that hidden corner of the solar system, something new was being built. Not just ships, but a promise. Then, one evening, a priority alert flashed on Luke's secure channel. Central Command had caught wind of unusual activity near Mars. An inspection team was being dispatched in 72 hours. They weren't ready. The jump drives hadn't been fully tested. The weapons, crude plasma turrets cobbled from mining lasers, had only fired in simulation. But waiting meant capture, and capture meant the Varelli would die alone. Luke gathered the team in the main bay of the Wayfarer. The lights flickered. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. "We don't have a fleet," he said. "We don't have orders. We don't even have a real plan. But someone's screaming into the dark, and we're the only ones who heard. If we turn back now, we're no better than the ones who voted to do nothing." No one argued. No one hesitated. Maya nodded. Jake cracked his knuckles. Riley gave a sharp thumbs up. Nina just zipped up her jacket and said, "Let's go save some lives." They powered up the engines that night. As the freighters lifted from the dock, silent and dark to avoid radar, Earth slept below, unaware that its children were leaving not for glory, not for conquest, but because civilization had failed, and someone had to pick up the pieces. The stars watched, and for the first time in a long while, humanity moved not as a planet, but as people. The 3 ships, and Wayfarer, Haven, and Longstride, slipped out of Mars orbit like shadows fleeing the sun. They ran dark, engines throttled low, comms silent. Behind them, Earth's laws still held power. But out here in the void between worlds, only physics and courage mattered. Luke stood on the bridge of the Wayfarer, watching the red dot of Mars shrink on the viewscreen. He didn't look back. There was nothing to go back to. Maya worked below deck, her fingers flying over the jump drive console. The phase coil hummed, unstable but alive. She'd warned them it might tear a hole in space or fry the ship's core. But it was their only way to cross light years in days, not decades. "We jump in 10, she said over the intercom, her voice steady despite the sweat on her brow. Jake gripped the pilot's yoke, eyes locked on the nav plot. Riley had patched the guidance system with spare parts from a lunar rover, and it glitched every few minutes, but it held. Nina checked the med bay one last time, securing vials of plasma and antibiotics in magnetic racks. She didn't know what injuries they'd face, but she knew pain didn't change, no matter the species. They called their mission ARC Protocol, not because they carried animals, but because they carried hope. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to stop the end of a people. The jump was rough. Space folded like crumpled paper, and for 3 terrifying seconds the ship groaned as if it might split apart. Lights flickered. Alarms blared, then died. Then silence. Then stars, new stars, swam into view. Kepler 186, what they saw made Nina gasp. The planet below was not dead, but dying. Great black scars covered its surface where cities once stood. Smoke curled from the equator. Orbital debris glittered like broken glass in the sunlight. Remnants of Varelli satellites now shattered. And circling high above, sleek and cruel, were Korath warships, needle-thin, armored in obsidian plating, bristling with weapons that glowed faintly purple. "They're still here," Jake whispered. Luke didn't answer. He was already scanning for life signs. The Ark fleet's sensors were weak, but they picked up faint energy pulses from the far side of the planet. Refugee camps, maybe, or hidden shelters. Then a new signal. A convoy of small vessels lifting off from the surface, moving slow, overloaded. Varelli survivors, they're running, Maya said, and the Korath are hunting them. Without waiting for orders, Jake angled the Wayfarer toward the convoy. Riley powered up the jury-rigged plasma turrets, 3 per ship, mounted like afterthoughts on the freighter's hulls. They weren't meant for war, but they'd have to do. The Korath noticed them fast. 2 interceptors peeled off from the main fleet, engines flaring blue-white. They moved like predators, smooth, silent, deadly. "Brace!" Luke shouted. The first shot missed, searing past the haven and vaporizing a chunk of floating rock. The second hit the Longstride's rear shield. Sparks flew inside the cabin. Riley cursed, rerouting power from life support to reinforce the barrier. "We can't take many more hits like that," he yelled. But they didn't need to win a battle. They just needed to buy time. Jake banked hard, drawing fire away from the refugee ships. Maya activated a solar flare decoy, a trick she'd tested in simulations, flooding the area with false heat signatures. For a few precious seconds, the Korath sensors scrambled. In that window, the Ark ships moved in, forming a protective ring around the Varelli convoy. Nina opened a channel to the refugees. She didn't speak their language, but she sent medical frequencies, universal distress codes used by every spacefaring species. A response came back. Weak, grateful, terrified. One of the Varelli ships was leaking atmosphere. Nina suited up and floated across the void, tethered to the haven, to patch the breach with sealant foam in her own hands. Outside, the stars were cold. Inside her helmet, she heard the Varelli's panicked breathing over the comms. She worked fast, her fingers numb, her heart pounding. When the seal held, she gave a thumbs up through her visor. A small hand pressed against the other side of the hull. A child, eyes wide with fear and wonder. Back on the Wayfarer, Luke recorded a message. He didn't know if anyone would hear it, but he had to try. "This is Commander Luke Garrett of the Earth Ark Fleet. We are not soldiers. We are not a government. We are just people who heard a cry for help. The Varelli are not alone anymore. And if you're watching this, Earth, Mars, anyone, know this, we came to help. Now we understand what happens when civilization chooses comfort over conscience." He sent it on every open frequency, encrypted and unencrypted, hoping it would find its way home. The Korath didn't give them time to rest. A larger ship, a command cruiser, dropped from orbit, its weapons charging with a low-rising whine. Luke knew they couldn't fight it. "All ships prepare for emergency jump," he ordered. But the refugee convoy couldn't jump. Their engines were too weak, their power too low. They'd be left behind. Nina made the call before anyone else could. "I'll stay," she said over the fleet channel. "I can reroute the Longstride's core to boost their drives. Give them enough juice to escape." "Nina, no," Luke said. "That'll leave you stranded." "Then I'll be stranded helping," she replied. "That's what I signed up for." There was no time to argue. Riley helped her link the power conduits while Jake laid down covering fire, strafing the Korath cruiser's sensor arrays. Maya calculated a jump path for the refugees, toward a nearby nebula, thick with ion clouds that would hide their trail. As the last Varelli ship blinked out of sight, the Korath fired. The blast struck the Longstride amidships. The ship didn't explode. It folded inward, crushed by a gravity pulse. Nina's final transmission was calm. "Tell Earth, we did the right thing." Silence followed. Luke closed his eyes. Then he opened them again hard. "Jump now," he said. The remaining 2 ships vanished into folded space, leaving behind smoke, wreckage, and one woman's courage. They emerged near a dead asteroid field, far from Kepler 186. The Varelli elders were safe for now. They gathered in the Haven's cargo bay, their tall, slender forms wrapped in thermal blankets. Their skin shimmered faintly like moonlight on water. One of them, an elder with silver markings around her eyes, approached Maya. Through a translator patch, she spoke. "You gave us more than rescue. You gave us witness. Now our story will not die." Luke listened from the doorway. He felt no pride, only weight. They had saved a few, but millions were gone, and the Korath were still out there. But something had changed. The Ark fleet was no longer just a rescue team. They were something else now, something sharper, angrier, more determined. Riley repaired what he could. Jake plotted new routes. Maya studied Varelli data crystals. learning how the Korath fought, how they thought. They learned the worst truth. The Dominion didn't just kill, they harvested. They took Virelli neural tissue, still alive, and used it to enhance their own minds, believing intelligence born of suffering was stronger. That night, as the ships drifted among silent rocks, Luke stood alone on the observation deck. He thought of Nina, of the child's hand on the hull, of the vote back on Earth that chose silence. He didn't pray. He made a promise. They would not run again. They would not hide. If the Korath thought humanity was soft, they were about to learn otherwise. The Ark fleet had started as a whisper of help. Now it would become a storm. And storms didn't ask permission. Luke's message reached Earth 3 weeks after it was sent. It traveled through relay satellites, bounced off deep space buoys, and finally landed in a public data stream that no government could fully control. Within hours, it was everywhere. People watched it on phones, on street screens, in classrooms. They saw the burning world, heard Nina's last words, saw the child's hand press against the hull. They saw what their leaders had chosen to ignore. Protests began in New York, then London, then Tokyo. Students walked out of schools. Dock workers refused to load military cargo. A retired general gave a speech in front of the White House and wept. "We taught our children to be kind," he said, "but not brave enough to act when kindness wasn't enough." Governments scrambled. Some denied the footage. Others called it unverified. But the truth had taken root. Maya's name trended worldwide. Luke was called a traitor by some, a hero by most. Petitions flooded the UN demanding action. For the first time in decades, Earth felt like one people, not a collection of nations. Meanwhile, far from home, the Ark fleet hid in the shadow of a nameless asteroid. The 2 remaining ships, and Wayfarer and Haven, were battered but functional. The Virelli elders shared what they knew. They spoke of Korath tactics, of their supply routes, of hidden bases where they processed neural tissue stolen from conquered species. One name kept coming up, the Maw, a massive orbital facility circling a gas giant in the Helios system. That was where the harvesting happened. That was where mines were broken and reused. Luke didn't hesitate. "We hit the Maw," he said. Riley frowned. "With what?" "We've got 2 freighters and mining lasers." "We've got surprise," Luke replied. "And rage." Maya studied the Virelli star charts. The Helios system was heavily guarded, but the Korath were arrogant. They believed no one would dare attack their core operations. They left blind spots, gaps in patrol routes, moments when sensor grids cycled. If they timed it right, they could slip in. Jake volunteered to pilot the infiltration run. He'd spent years flying through asteroid belts and ion storms. "I can get us close," he said. "But we'll need a distraction." The Virelli offered one of their own, a small scout ship cloaked in bioadaptive skin that bent light around it. It wasn't armed, but it was fast. An elder named Kale would pilot it. "My people are gone," he said. "Let me give my life meaning." The plan was simple, desperate, and almost certainly fatal. Jake would take the Wayfarer on a fake distress signal near the outer rim of the system, drawing patrols away. Kale would slip the scout ship through the blind zone and disable the Maw's main comms array. Then Luke and Riley in the Haven would dock with the facility and plant explosive charges on the neural processing core. Nina's absence hung over them like cold air. No one said her name, but they all felt her. When Riley checked the medbay, he paused at her empty station. Then he loaded extra trauma kits just in case. The jump to Helios was tense. They traveled in silence, engines off, drifting like space junk. When they arrived, Jake activated the distress beacon, a looped recording of a damaged Korath freighter. It worked. 3 patrol ships peeled off and raced toward him. He led them on a chase through a debris field, firing flares and dumping coolant to mimic engine failure. At the same time, Kyle's scout ship vanished into the distortion belt around the gas giant. The Maw loomed ahead, a monstrous ring of black metal, studded with towers and vents that pulsed with sickly green light. Inside, thousands of minds were trapped in fluid tanks, their thoughts siphoned into Korath command networks. Kale reached the comm spire. He didn't hesitate. He rammed his ship into the base of the tower. The explosion was small but precise, severing the primary uplink. Alarms blared across the facility, but without comms, the Maw couldn't call for help. Luke and Riley docked in the chaos. They wore stolen Korath armor, salvaged from a wreck near Kepler 186, and moved fast through sterile corridors. The air smelled of ozone and something sweet like rotting fruit. They passed holding cells with empty restraints. They heard faint whispers through the walls, echoes of stolen thoughts. They found the core chamber deep in the facility's heart. A vast dome filled with glowing tanks, each holding a brain suspended in amber fluid. Wires snaked from them into a central column that pulsed like a heartbeat. Riley set the charges while Luke stood guard, plasma rifle ready. Then the lights flickered. Backup power. Korath soldiers poured in from side tunnels, tall, armored, faces hidden behind smooth masks. Luke fired. The plasma bolts tore through the first two, but more kept coming. Riley finished the last charge and yelled, "Go!" They ran, dodging fire, leaping over fallen panels. Behind them, the charges detonated in sequence. The core column cracked, then exploded in a wave of blue fire. The entire maw shuddered. Systems failed. Lights died. The whispers in the walls fell silent, finally at peace. They barely made it back to the haven. Jake, bleeding from a shrapnel wound but grinning, pulled them away just as the maw began to collapse in on itself. Kale's sacrifice, Nina's memory, and their own fury had done what no government would. But the victory was short-lived. As they jumped clear of the system, a final Korath transmission broke through the static. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. "Earth," the voice said, cold and sharp. "You have struck at the Dominion. Now we strike at you. Your world will burn for this." The message repeated on every frequency. Then it stopped. Back on the haven, no one spoke. They knew what it meant. The Korath weren't just coming for them. They were coming for everyone. Luke looked at the view screen, at the stars that had once seemed full of wonder. Now they felt like eyes watching, waiting. He thought of cities on Earth. Chicago, Cairo, Sydney, full of people who didn't know war was coming to their skies. But something had changed since they left. Earth wasn't silent anymore. Protests had turned into policy. Factories were retooling. Shipyards were lighting up. And Maya's research, once dismissed, was now being used to build real defenses. They had lit a spark. Now they had to make sure it didn't go out. "Set course for Sol," Luke said. "We're going home, not to hide, not to surrender, but to stand with the world they'd tried to wake up. Because the Korath were wrong about one thing. Earth wasn't soft. It had just been sleeping. And now it was wide awake." The Ark fleet returned to the Sol system not as outlaws but as warnings made flesh. Their ships, scarred and smoking from the Maw raid, limped past Neptune's orbit and sent a single-coded pulse to Earth defense. Within minutes, response craft scrambled, not to arrest them but to escort them home. The world had changed while they were gone. Cities that once debated ethics now built weapons. Shipyards that once assembled luxury cruisers now welded armor onto freighters and science vessels. Maya's phase coil design, once labeled unstable, was now being mass-produced in orbital factories. Her name was on every engineering schematic. Luke's face was on recruitment posters. "Join the Shield," they read. "Protect what matters." Project Iron Shield was no longer a rumor. It was real, and it was growing fast. The Ark fleet docked at the newly expanded station orbiting Jupiter, once a research outpost, now Earth's frontline command hub. They were met not by soldiers but by scientists, engineers, and grieving families who had lost loved ones to inaction. A woman pressed a photo into Luke's hand. Her son, a linguist who had begged the UN to respond to the Varelli signal before it was too late. He had died in a protest march. "Thank you for doing what we couldn't," she whispered. Maya was pulled into a war room within hours. Generals, physicists, and Varelli elders stood around a holographic table showing Korath fleet movements. The Dominion was gathering. Scout ships had been spotted near the Oort cloud. They were coming just as they promised, but Earth was ready to meet them. Maya's task was clear: integrate Varelli bioresonance tech into human warships. The Varelli didn't use weapons the way humans did. They used sound, memory, and neural harmony to disrupt enemy systems. At first, engineers scoffed. Then Maya showed them footage from the Maw, how a single frequency pulse had shut down an entire processing core. "It's not magic," she said. "It's biology meeting physics. And it works." Riley joined the retrofit teams. He walked the decks of half-built destroyers, pointing out weak joints, suggesting better power routing, teaching young techs how to jury-rig under pressure. "Perfection gets you killed in space," he told them. "Adaptability keeps you alive." Jake, still healing from his wounds, became a flight instructor. He taught pilots how to fly dirty, how to use debris fields, solar flares, and even civilian traffic as cover. "The Korath expect clean battles," he said. "We're going to give them chaos." Luke didn't take a command post. He walked among the people. He spoke to dock workers, to medics, to teenagers signing up for the first time. He told them about Nina, about Kale, about the child's hand on the hull. He didn't speak of glory. He spoke of duty, of the moment when being civilized stops being enough. Then the first Korath ship crossed into the outer system. It was a scout, sleek and silent, moving just beyond Pluto's orbit. Earth's new sensor net caught it instantly. Instead of hiding, Earth broadcast a message on all channels. "You are trespassing. Leave now or be removed." The Korath didn't reply. They fired. A plasma bolt struck an unmanned relay station. It vaporized in a flash of white light. The message was clear. This was not a warning. This was the beginning. Earth's response was immediate. 3 newly commissioned frigates, Resolve, Anchor, and Vanguard, launched from Jupiter orbit. They carried Maya's resonance emitters and Riley's reinforced hulls. They moved in a tight formation, not like soldiers, but like a pack. The battle was short. The Korath scout was fast, but it wasn't ready for the sonic pulse that scrambled its navigation. It spun out of control, then exploded when its own weapons overloaded. Debris rained into the Kuiper Belt. It was the first human victory over an alien warship. People cheered, but Luke didn't. He knew this was just the scout. The real fleet was coming, and it did. 2 weeks later, the sky beyond Saturn lit up with unnatural stars, hundreds of them. The Korath main force had arrived. Cruisers, carriers, destroyers, all shaped like blades. They formed a wall of darkness between Earth and the outer planets. Their flagship, the Scourge of Silence, pulsed with dark energy at its core. Earth's fleet gathered near Jupiter. Not just military ships now, but retrofitted cargo haulers, mining rigs with turrets welded on, even old tourism shuttles armed with missile pods. It was messy. It was desperate. But it was united. Maya stood on the bridge of the Perseverance and the flagship of the new fleet, built around the skeleton of the old Wayfarer. Luke stood beside her. Jake was in the pilot's seat. Riley was below, making last-minute adjustments to the resonance core. "They think we're weak because we talk," Luke said, staring at the enemy formation. "They think we'll negotiate while they aim their guns." "They don't know us," Maya nodded. "Today we show them who we really are." The Korath sent one final message. "Surrender your world. Give us your minds, or be erased like the Varelli." Earth didn't reply with words. It replied with fire. The battle began with a solar flare, triggered by Earth engineers to blind Korath sensors for 12 critical seconds. In that window, Jake led a strike group through Saturn's rings using ice chunks as cover. They launched missiles not at hulls but at the Korath command relays. At the same time, Maya activated the resonance emitters. A low hum spread through space, not sound, but a vibration in the fabric of neural networks. Korath ships shuddered. Their crews clutched their heads. Their systems glitched. The Perseverance charged straight for the Scourge of Silence. Luke didn't order evasive maneuvers. He ordered full speed ahead. "They want a reckoning," he said. "Let's give them one." Riley's voice crackled over the comms. "Core's at 90%, one shot. Make it count." As the 2 flagships closed, Maya locked onto the enemy's central neural hub, the same kind they'd seen at the Maw. She fed the coordinates into the resonance weapon. Jake lined up the shot. Luke held his breath. The pulse fired. It didn't explode. It resonated. Like a note so pure it shatters glass, the wave hit the Scourge of Silence and traveled through every ship linked to its command net. Lights died. Weapons powered down. The entire Korath fleet went dark. Silence fell over the battlefield. Then one by one, Korath ships began to drift, powerless, their crews stunned or unconscious. The Dominion's greatest strength, their hive-mind command structure, had become their weakness. Earth's fleet moved in, not to destroy, but to disable. They locked down engines, sealed hatches, and prepared to take prisoners. For the first time, the hunters were the hunted. Back on the Perseverance, no one cheered. They were too tired, too aware of the cost, but they stood a little taller. Luke looked at the view screen at the broken enemy fleet floating like dead leaves. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "But it's a start." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now the real work begins," and she was right. Because winning a battle wasn't enough. They had to build a future where no one had to choose between being civilized and doing what was right. That future wouldn't be perfect, but for the first time it was possible. The silence after the battle was heavier than the fighting. The Korath fleet drifted in broken pieces near Saturn's rings, their dark ships now just cold metal and stunned crews. Earth's ships moved among them like shepherds gathering lost sheep, not with guns raised but with rescue tethers and containment fields. They took prisoners not for revenge but for answers, for justice, for understanding. Luke stood on the observation deck of the Perseverance watching the cleanup. His uniform was torn, his face unshaven, but his eyes were clear. He had expected rage after the victory. Instead, he felt only quiet resolve. The war wasn't over. Wars like this never truly ended, but the fear was gone. Humanity had looked into the abyss and hadn't blinked. Maya joined him holding 2 mugs of real coffee, brewed from beans grown in a hydroponic bay on Jupiter Station. "They're calling it the Saturn stand," she said. "History books will say we saved Earth." "We didn't save Earth," Luke replied. "We reminded it how to fight for something bigger than itself." Down in the med bay, Nina's old station was now manned by a young medic named Dana, who had signed up the day Luke's message went viral. She treated both human and Korath wounded, her hands steady, her voice calm. One Korath prisoner, a low-ranking technician, stared at her in confusion. "Why help us?" he asked through a translator. Dana just shrugged. "Because someone has to start. Back on Earth, the world celebrated, but not with parades, not with statues. Instead, cities held vigils for the Virelli, for Nina, for every life lost to silence. Schools taught the Kepler 186 signal as a lesson in moral courage. Lawmakers drafted a new charter not for war but for protection. It was called the Interstellar Covenant of Protection. Its first line read, "When genocide speaks, civilization must answer, not with words but with action." Every nation signed it, even the ones that had voted to do nothing. The Ark fleet, once outlaws, were now the first guardians of the Covenant. They didn't retire. They trained, they rebuilt. The Haven was refitted as a mobile hospital. The Perseverance became a command vessel for rapid response. New ships joined them, built not just by governments but by citizens who donated time, metal, and hope. Riley oversaw the construction of a new class of vessel, the Watcher-class frigate. Small, fast, armed not for conquest but for rescue, each one carried a resonance emitter, a medical bay, and a message beacon that could broadcast across star systems. "So no one ever feels alone again," he said. Jake took the first Watcher-class ship on a shakedown run near the Oort cloud. He wasn't hunting enemies. He was listening, scanning for distress calls, for whispers in the dark. He found one, a mining colony under attack by pirates. He didn't fire. He just showed up, lights blazing, weapons hot. The pirates fled. The miners wept with relief. Luke and Maya stood together on the rebuilt orbital station near Mars, the same place where Ark Protocol began. Below them, Earth turned blue and fragile. Above them, new ships launched daily, not for war but for vigilance. Some carried diplomats, some carried doctors, some carried soldiers, but only as a last resort. "We used to think being civilized meant never throwing the first punch," Maya said. "Now we know it means never letting the innocent take the last breath." Luke nodded. He thought of the child's hand on the hull, of Nina's final words, of the Virelli elder who said their story would not die. They had kept that promise, and now they would keep it for others. The Korath Dominion didn't vanish. Some of their ships escaped. Their ideology still lived in the dark corners of the galaxy, but they were no longer unstoppable. They had met a species that chose conscience over comfort and lost. Earth didn't become an empire. It became a shield. Not perfect, not all-powerful, but present. Ready. Watching. Years later, when new signals came, faint cries from distant stars, Earth didn't debate. It responded. A Watcher-class ship would jump to the source. A medic would stand ready. A pilot would fly into danger. And somewhere on a quiet deck overlooking the stars, Luke and Maya would listen, knowing they had helped build something rare in the universe, a civilization that remembered its soul. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but now in its endless dark, there was a light that refused to go out, not because it was strong, but because it chose to burn, and that was enough.